Hello, everybody. Welcome to Drunk with Questions. I'm Gooch.
And I'm Raj. Join us as we navigate the complexities of life. Here, alcohol may not be the answer, but it's sure as hell worth a shot.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Drunk with Questions, the talk show where ordinary people talk about extraordinary topics. With me today is Raj, Spicy, and Tim.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Well, I have to apologize to the viewers today, but I am sick, unfortunately. Very sick. So, yeah. I don't know if the stuffy nose gives me more of a sultry voice or what, so... I don't want a bunch
of a something voice.
It gives you something voice. Yeah,
I don't want a bunch of
seductive.
love letters. All right, we'll just move on. It is what it is. So
everybody send love letters, please.
Yeah, we're not letting him lick the adhesive on the return envelopes. Don't worry.
It's why he's sick.
It'd be like a form of bioterrorism. That's how we get recognized. Small podcast group charged with bioterrorism.
The headlines.
Your FBI agent's watching you right now.
Hey, man, all publicity is good publicity.
He's getting lumped in with all the other eco-terrorists and biological terrorists out there.
Well, speaking of eco-terrorism, we got an interesting one for the group today, the Drunk with Questions crew.
The thought experiment.
Well, yeah. I guess we can get started with that. For people that haven't heard yet, because it's only episode 2 of season 2, instead of me burning Raj every start of the episode, we are going to do thought experiments.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome.
Yeah, they're fun, but we do enjoy the sweet roast of Raj.
Yeah. So today, we have Spicy bringing it to us. So Spicy's going to pose the question, and we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about it, kind of get our minds, worked out for the actual topic. So, Spicy, take it away.
All right, so kind of looking up some thought experiments. So this one was written by a famed utilitarian thinker, so Peter Singer, back in 2009. So the premise goes, imagine you're walking down a street and you notice a child drowning in a lake. You can swim and you're close enough to save the child if you act immediately. However, if you do it, it's going to ruin your expensive shoes. Do you still have an obligation to save the child? So Singer, his opinion was yes, you do have a responsibility to save the child because the cost is no object, price is no object. But agreeing with him leads to a question that if you're obligated to save the life of the child in need right in front of you, is there a fundamental difference between saving the child in front of you and one that needs your help on the other side of the world?
I like this question. So it's a deeply philosophical one. We're looking at the idea of saving the child in front of you being no different from saving the child on the other side of the planet. But I think there is a fundamental difference because the actions that you can take right then and there can save a life. And it's the choice of doing something to save a life in front of you instead of walking away. And I think as humans, like when you see a child in danger, you're more likely to act. It's almost like something that's ingrained in you. Like it comes out of just you when something like that presents itself, that you really don't have any control over it. I think it's almost like an evolutionary trait for us to protect our young. And it doesn't even matter if it's our young or somebody else's. If we see a child in danger, your tendency is to act. And I believe that you're more likely to act if it's a child versus another adult. And I just believe that's just part of our evolutionary process and how we are as a species. We're going to protect that child no matter what. Now, whether or not it equates to the same as saving a child on the other side of the world, I mean, both are great. But if you don't act in that moment, I feel like you have no right to be doing anything anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the route, though, that you absolutely do not have any obligation to help anybody, honestly. Although I do agree with what Raj is saying, which is, it's innate that you would want to, most people at least, right? And I'm not saying that I wouldn't help, but I don't believe in any sense of the word that there's any obligation. So at the end of the day, humans are animalistic, right? If a zebra gets attacked by the crocodile, most of the time the other zebras aren't coming back to save the one. Sometimes you'll see some, but most of the times they're not coming back. It is what it is, gone to the wind. So I don't believe we have an obligation at all.
Okay, that's an interesting way. So you're basically saying almost like an animalistic survival of the fittest kind of scenario where even though, but here's my argument against that.
Self-preservation and survival of the fittest. Yeah.
Now it doesn't say that you don't know how to swim, so you're not in any danger for trying to attempt to save that child.
No,
So
I know, but I'm just saying.
if that child was being mauled by a lion,
What? Yeah, I'm not doing it. Sorry,
you're not doing
bro.
it.
No,
But if
I
the
will
kid's
lose.
drowning, this is not like a scenario where you are in danger of drowning or you're in danger of getting mauled by the animal instead of the child. You know, it's a case of you save the child from drowning. If the situation was the child is being attacked by something dangerous that could kill you, then the parameters change, because at that point you're like, it's either self-preservation or giving yourself up to save the child. You know, there's different factors that come into play there, but you're gonna act if it's just a simple matter as saving a drowning child.
I just don't think we as humans are obligated to save it. You know, I don't think anyone is obligated to do anything, honestly.
Isn't it an obligation for the species? It's the same reason that when a baby cries, we have this innate sense. It's almost ingrained in us. The baby crying is supposed to be super annoying and super anxiety inducing for us, is because that's what's ingrained in us.
No, I know, but it's just I think I'm hung up on the obligation part. I am not obligated to save your child. I'm not, and I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. I probably would personally, depending on the situation. But just as another human to another human, there is no obligation, and there's really no laws, frankly, that force you to save somebody's life. Most of the time, 911 will tell you not to do anything and just wait for emergency help. You know.
But
Yeah,
do
that's
you
kinda where
believe
I'll-
that that would lead to society falling apart?
We generally go with don't put yourself in danger when someone else is in danger. Go ahead, Spicy.
Well, that's kind of where I'll jump in on it too. So, I mean, like you kind of made a point into what I was going to say. So, I mean, it comes down to what people believe an obligation means. So, like you pointed out, Gooch, that there's no legal obligation that compels anybody to have to intervene. There are certain circumstances where, due to a job, that you do have a duty to intervene. You are legally obligated to do so. Not always. Even police officers aren't always obligated to intervene in something, but there becomes different kind of obligations, I think. So now you have either a societal obligation based on the rules of your society, or you have a moral obligation, kind of that personal obligation. So there's different levels of it. You're not going to be held legally accountable for it because there's nothing compelling you to do so. But you come down to more of the moral obligations and that personal, like you said, you would probably do it. Like you're not saying you wouldn't, but are people obligated to do so? No, I mean, like on a legal sense, no. And I think that's what a lot of people think of in today's world. They think of things in terms of a legal obligation and not necessarily, in my opinion, we've kind of lost as a society our sense of like civic and civil obligations to each other and moral obligations. I think overall in our society, and I don't know if you guys tend to agree, the sense of community that was built in our relationships has deteriorated over time, and we've become more of an individual focused society rather than a group focused society.
I mean, I think we see that happen even in our own lives. Like, I mean, when we saw something that happens, like when people would rather videotape something rather than act when something's happening in front of them. Like, especially, I mean, we saw it with what happened with police officers with George Floyd and the incident there, where basically the guy is on the ground screaming for his mom, telling them he can't breathe. And because they're police officers, we just assume that they're always right and we don't act. Or the people there didn't pull the police officers off because they were afraid of something happening to them, and they just videotaped. And I'm glad they videotaped, because I mean, it eventually led to the prosecution of these people. But It's the lack of act. How many people will see an accident happen and then they'll just drive past it or take a video of it without actually getting out to check if the person's okay?
Pretty sure there's a
And
study that a university in New York did. They had two actors set up in an alleyway in New York City, and the girl was like screaming, saying she was being raped or whatever. And it was only like 1 in 10 people did anything about it. The
Well,
rest
and
just
this falls into psychology. It's known as the bystander effect. So the bystander effect essentially is this psychological phenomena that, as people, it kind of fits with what you were saying, Gooch, this self-preservation type instinct, or it's not even that a lot of times. It's just the phenomena that we as bystanders will sometimes, like, we'll just ignore something or somebody that needs assistance because we think that there's somebody else that will help them, whether it be a first responder coming or another individual that we think is more capable than us, or just, I don't want to get involved in that. I don't want to be, go to court on it, be hurt, anything, whatever the motivation is behind it. You think that somebody else will help them, so you ignore it. And unfortunately, that keeps happening, and which is why things continue to go on longer and longer in these situations because people are experiencing that bystander effect.
what do you think, Tim?
Yeah, what do you think, Tim?
So I'm gonna not really dive that deep into this one. Personally, like, yeah, I'd help the child just as a moral obligation. What the second part of it was, were we listening to all this, like, we were still talking about ruining your like expensive shoes? Is that still part of that?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so like, yeah, I mean, shoes are replaceable, right? It's just a material good. And so yeah, I think I would definitely save the drowning child because it's something that I can directly impact in front of me. As far as on a global stance, I don't feel any obligation to help somewhere else where I'm not making the direct impact. Just like, you go to the grocery store and they're like, hey, would you like to round up to the nearest dollar to donate to this organization? Nope. You know why? Because that's a tax write-off for that company, right? Like, if I want to donate to the organization, I'll donate directly to the organization. Why help a multi-million-dollar company meet their tax write-offs, right? So that's, doesn't really matter what organization it is. If you want to really make an impact, either you directly going in and trying to do something positive and make some change, versus just, oh yeah, it's easy because I'll just round up the whatever odd change to the next dollar and you guys can donate it. Well, that usually doesn't go much further than that. So yeah, I think like taking out all the legal aspects of it, because there's the Good Samaritan law. Even if you went in there and got the kid and they got injured or whatever, you're still protected most areas. And one of those things that goes into more of I'm blanking on the word for it. Just your like personal integrity. Like, even if nobody's watching you, right? There's just this kid drowning in a river. Like, let's say you're going on a hike and this kid decided to sneak out of the backyard or whatever, right? Like, you should still do something, because kids, for whatever reason, naturally gravitate towards water, right? Like, it doesn't matter where you are. They just, like, if there's a pool in the backyard, they'll find it. If there's a river, if you're on a lake
I'm going
house.
to need you to cite sources on that, Timothy.
I mean, the number of drownings kind of speaks for itself. But it's just one of those things, like, yeah, so, survival of the fittest can play a part in the animal world, right? Just recently, there was elephants are just incredible animals to begin with. But there was a female elephant who, her calf fell down into a drainage ditch, like a culvert, and the calf couldn't get out. So she climbed halfway down there so her calf could still milk. And then she ended up getting stuck, but then, the rescuers ended up finding them and saved both of them. But her natural instinct. She knew something was wrong. Her calf needed to be fed, so she even put her own life at risk to try and feed her calf without the full understanding of the implications. She didn't really have any forethought on that. Like, all right, if I get in this hole, how do I get out?
Elephants also have like a gigantic vested interest in their children. I mean, the
Yeah.
gestation period's like 18 months.
Well,
I
even
mean,
if their
gazelles do the
child,
same thing. Gazelles do it, and then you have like any of these larger mammals,
um,
buffalo, they'll surround
primates,
the entire children in the middle while the adults are outside protecting it from any
yeah,
danger. So it's a community effort to save these kids. Like, because I one of the things that we talked about before about or maybe we didn't cover, I talked to somebody else about, was the community effect of raising a child, where it's not just your parents that are responsible for you, but the entire community looks out for you. Like where I come from, that's generally how kids are raised, where everybody, if I'm in the neighborhood and doing something stupid, somebody from the neighborhood's going to see me and they're going to tell my parents, or they're going to come in and police me. And so there's a general safety. We don't worry about some outsider coming into our neighborhood and doing something to the kids, because everyone's usually watching everyone's kids. But maybe that's lost on the newer generation, where it's more of a family where you're worried about your own kids, I'll worry about mine, and
for
we'll look the other way.
a lot of families, though, it seems like they're not even worried about their own kids. Kids are kind
Well, I
of
think
raising themselves in a lot of areas or aspects.
The internet's raising these kids.
Yeah,
That's what's happening. The
Oh, for
internet is
sure.
teaching the kids everything that the parents should be teaching them, but it's now coming from an unfiltered source with no direction or no guiding voice in it.
Well, it sounds like we're moving into our topic, so I'll say we'll cut off the thought experiment there. Because for the listeners who don't know, our topic today is the woke movement. Now, everyone has their own personal viewpoints on wokeness, and I think everyone also has their own idea of what is wokeness and what is more, trying to be careful of how I say this, possibly mental disease. How about that? Mental illness. Um, so, although we're probably going to have some tough conversation here, especially for some of our viewers or other people, just understand that we're not attempting to, hurt anyone's feelings or belittle them or make them feel like they're unimportant. We're simply just bringing wokeness into the limelight, and that's what we've always done in this podcast, right? We're not here to judge anybody for anything. We're trying to bring this topic into the limelight, shine the flashlight directly on it, and really try to dissect it and understand it. We all have different opinions in this here at Drunk with Questions. So we ask that as much as we respect each other, you respect us as well. With that, I think the biggest issue with wokeness is that it was built on good foundation, and then they used rickety scrap metal to build everything else around it, right? So, not for 1 second am I going to say that the original ideas behind it, the Me Too movement, everything like that, wasn't correct. I know that there were probably a lot of women in Hollywood that were hiding sexual assault because they were afraid that they would be ostracized from, Hollywood because of it. But do I think nowadays that there are plenty of females that are taking advantage of it? Absolutely. I really do. Probably making up stories as well. And that's unfortunate. And we don't have laws right now that protect people from that, because you can say whatever you want if you're a female or a male, if you're a sexual assault victim. And then if it comes out to nothing happened, you basically maybe get a slap on the wrist. There's really no punishment. So I think that would kind of be where I would start with wokeness, is the Me Too movement.
So let's start with the definition of woke for those of you that are listening and don't really know what it means. Maybe it doesn't exist in your part of the world. Maybe it's more of a societal thing here in America. So the actual definition based on Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, is an awareness of an active or being actively attentive to important social facts and issues, especially issues that have to do with racial and social justice. Now, the definition by itself, it's not that bad of a thing. It's just you being attentive to what's going on in the world and kind of calibrating yourself to
Strong
the
foundation.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, just having an understanding of what's actually going on in the world. But I feel like there's a wash in where everything gets called woke, where the actual terminology is lost its definition, is morphed into some kind of monster where, if you don't agree with someone on something, you're not woke. If you believe something differently from them, you're not woke. If you have even a similar take but a different end theory on something, you're not woke. So the issue with this whole woke movement is there's no structured idea of what actually woke is. So people on the left side say that the conservatives aren't woke, and then the conservatives say that the liberals aren't woke. It's basically nobody has an idea of what actually is going on here. So I think it's morphed into some kind of internet demon that's pretty much haunting us now. And in my sense of this definition for woke is not a bad thing. Being attentive to what's going on in society and calibrating yourself to match, because society is a fluid thing. Everything changes in society. Things that are okay now were not okay 50 years ago. There are things that change. It becomes societally acceptable to do or to say. And sometimes it goes the reverse. It becomes less acceptable to say certain things. And that's just how society functions. But if we use woke as a weapon, it turns into something we like to call cancel culture, which is the biggest problem that I have with the woke movement, is the canceling of people for ideas that are different from yours. Now, I'm not going to say that you can't call somebody an idiot for believing something. This is America. You can say and do whatever you want. You have the freedom of speech, but you do not have the freedom of escaping the consequence of that speech. You will have to deal with it. But in that light, when you're talking about people being canceled for saying something or saying something even 10 years ago, and you're trying to cancel them now, it just doesn't sit well with me. Cancel culture has kind of gotten ridiculous in what it's trying to do. The moment you say something, everyone joins the bandwagon. I mean, when this stuff can affect your job, can affect your livelihood, can affect your reputation, and everyone's walking around on pins and needles trying to figure out what they can and can't say. It's a huge problem for society, because I feel like we can no longer have freedom of speech. And the whole idea of our government is that all people have a voice, no matter what their opinion is, and we take that voice, we put it to a vote, and you make a decision on it. And I feel like that doesn't happen anymore. Now it's just smear campaigns left and right on who's right and who's wrong. So that's my understanding of woke. If you guys have something different, please let me know.
I mean, I'd say that I agree with a lot of that. I mean, to kind of what I was thinking when you were going through your explanation of it, I think that term and the action behind it has kind of been weaponized against people, essentially, like you said, that have a differing opinion than others, or disagree with something, maybe not in the way it's done, but the outcomes. And it's one of those things where, yeah, I mean, the saying, like you said, oh, well, you're not woke enough, or you're not, that's not woke. Like, you're just stuck in the past. It's like, no, I mean, they have a different opinion, and it's worth hearing different opinions. But unfortunately, we live in a day and age where it seems like there's a lot of people that aren't interested in coming together, kind of like what we're doing, and having these conversations with differing opinions, because you can't sharpen your own knowledge unless you're exposed to something that contradicts what you believe or So if you just constantly just have stuff that confirms what you already know, then you're not really challenging yourself to think critically or outside of the box. And that goes in both directions. It's one of those things where essentially you're basically just getting gaslighted the whole time. Where, and I'm not saying that you have to agree with the opposing ideas, because I hear differing opinions all the time. I don't agree with them at all, But if I didn't get exposed to that, I would live in this insular bubble where everything was just what I had always believed it to be. And then if you get into that for too long, I'm a firm believer that you're going to have a very negative reaction when you come into the world and like get that pushback from differing opinions of your own. There's some people that they cannot handle that because they've never been exposed to it. And so I mean, being aware of what's going on in society, being aware of what's going on in your communities, it's important. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that everybody believes. I think it's, and I'm not saying that every movement that or anything that goes into all of that is correct either, because I think there's a lot of hijacking going on of terms, of movements, of let me present it in this way and people are good with it, but then in reality, here's what we're doing over here, and it's like, no, that's not necessarily a good thing. And so, and one of my favorite things too that I heard, I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Ben Shapiro or somebody I first heard it from. Is me personally, especially being in like the law enforcement realm, the criminal justice sphere, potentially looking at going to law school in the future, haven't fully decided. Me personally, I don't like the term social justice because in all reality, like justice itself is supposed to be the concept of like the adage of justice is blind. Whether people agree that that is true or not, obviously we're flawed people with an imperfect system, but the concept of justice is supposed to be doing what's right and punishing what's wrong. Like, so anytime that you qualify it with a different term of like economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, to me it almost kind of perverts the term in the sense that like you're trying to now reach a goal sometimes that maybe it's not what true justice is. And if that makes sense, if you're trying, I'm trying to explain it the best I can. um in my opinion, like justice should just be that, like it is what it is. It's supposed to be doing what's right and punishing what's wrong, and it doesn't really need to be qualified any other way, and that should apply to any situation. I don't need to put a different label on it.
No, I completely get what you're saying, because basically you're saying that the overarching narrative of justice is to protect and to stop bad things from happening. It's supposed to be the equalizer, and it's blind. And we can all pretty much agree that it's not blind in this country as it sits right now. There is definitely biases, definitely things that come into place, and that just has to do with us as human beings, because we're not, like Spicy said, we're not perfect. Our
Yeah,
system's not perfect.
you're never going to find a area where that doesn't. We have safeguards in place to try to make it as equitable as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, also too, as a country, I mean, we can jump into this a little more later, but I mean, there's a difference in society between a difference of equality of opportunity and equality of outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I mean, we have these safeguards. We try to be as impartial as we can, regardless. Somebody may not have extreme biases, but if anybody says that they are not biased to something, they haven't done enough introspection, because there is always something that is going to be a bias in your life based on your experiences.
Go ahead, Tim. I want to hear your opening statements.
Well, I mean, woke is an increase in sensitivity, emotional particularly, right? So woke culture killed comedy. We can't make fun of ourselves, we can't make fun of other people like we used to, because everybody's super sensitive. It is not an individual's responsibility to tiptoe around what might trigger someone else. It is your responsibility to appropriately take care of something that triggers you, no one else's. I think that's a really big thing, because comedians, they didn't care what side of the aisle you were on politically. They didn't care what you look like. I understand there are some things that are inappropriate to talk about or make fun of, but if you can't make fun of yourself, you just lose it all. You should be able to look at your flaws, be like, oh yeah, I can make fun of that, right? And move on with your life, because you're an adult. You've learned how to adjust to things that you may not like to hear, or you may play in with it. I agree though that the original premise behind being woke and being open to different ideas and beliefs and everything, kind of like what Spicy and Raj, justice should be blind. On the justice aspect of it, right? Treat your neighbor like you'd want to be treated. That even goes back into a biblical concept, right? To love your neighbor. I'm pretty sure in different religions too, and not 100% sure on that, but essentially be a good person is what I'm getting at. But at the same time, don't force your opinion on someone else. And then when they don't agree with you, start throwing out names, right? Name calling or racial group profiling or treat everybody as an individual, right? Instead of, oh, they didn't agree with me, so they're X, Y, or Z. Well, no, because I think there's still good people out there, but good people are using wokeness to do bad things or to justify bad things. Right. So, and that's happened all throughout history, but like most recently, right? So there's everybody knows the different police shootings that have been involved. Antifa, I think, was specifically a more violence organized group, and most of the media doesn't show that, but the billions of dollars in damage that they caused, they're anti-fascist, right? But being anti-fascist in the way that they were trying to fight fascism was in fact itself fascist. When you are shutting down opposing ideas, you are a fascist instead of expressing them, openly debating them without hurling names and insults. The other group that quickly rose and disappeared was BLM. And I mean, you can search multiple news outlets and see all the corruption that formed from that specific organization, right? Like, for example, there was a gentleman who was an exec who ended up stealing $10 million in donor funds from the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. These people used tragedy for personal gain. And I think it could have been a good person who then exploited an opportunity. I think, but then nobody's really calling out those individuals. Or even education system introducing certain types of curriculum that are being kind of forced onto our kids in one sense or another without really any oversight, right? Some of this curriculum is just kind of being implemented by school boards, and then parents find out about it and they rightfully are angry, whatever it may be. It's like, we should be teaching our children all your basic stuff that you learn through elementary school, right? I specifically don't think that you should be teaching an elementary child about sexual education. I think that's a completely inappropriate thing. There's a time and a place for that. And I definitely think that those conversations specifically should be left to the parents. It's not the government's job to dictate what happens in your bedroom or to teach children about things that they don't need to know. Children are very impressionable. And that's where also the wokeness kind of slipped into the education system. As far as from political ideologies to gender identities, I think the world is laughing at us in America, right? You look at some other countries that are focused on science, mathematics as a core to education, and they are far outpacing the United States in standardized testing. take standardized testing with a grain of salt, but if you're walking around with your eyes open in the world, I'm pretty sure you can see people aren't smarter than they used to be, kind of heading in the opposite direction. Global distractions, things, social media, having a cell phone 24/7 definitely doesn't help the cause. And I just think the United States in woke culture is a laughing stock. You look at China for an example. Maybe not the best one, but their education is far superior. Most Asian, Middle Eastern cultures heavily focus on mathematics and science because that's what gets you places in the world. That's what makes the world a better place, not what do you identify as today. And even our own U.S. Department of Defense has been focusing in on, gender terms, or what do you want to be identified as. That shouldn't be a focus of the Department of Defense. And I think Putin's a bad person, but I think that, him stating in one of his speeches about, like, what is the US doing? And not even necessarily the Western ideology, because throughout history, it's brought negative things like slavery, kind of globalized that, colonialism, clearly globalized that. But Western ideology also brought freedoms, right? Not necessarily equal outcome, but throughout history, equal opportunity, right? If you put your mind to it, you can do a whole lot, and don't victimize yourself, right? Just because you may have specific characteristics, I'll never get that because of this, and this. I'm oppressed because this, and this. This person clearly will be chosen because of this, and this. Whatever it may be. If you're victimizing yourself, you're never going to have the outcome that you want. I don't know. I think woke culture is killing society. It's splitting society.
Well, I wanna kind of do some counter arguments to what Tim was saying, just for argument's sake. So just so we have, because we have to have both sides of the spectrum, right? So I want to go into detail. I wrote down some of the stuff that you
Just
brought
no
up,
name
Tim.
calling.
No name calling. That's not what this podcast is about. So this is just my interpretation of what you said versus what I'd like to add to the story as well. Now, first thing we started off with was Antifa and BLM and some of these organizations that are corrupt. And I'm not saying that they aren't. They very likely could be, because anytime an organization gets that large, corruption is going to follow. And that tends to be the same case. We see the same thing with the NRA and several conservative groups just like this. We see it all the time, and that's an organizational issue, and that's an issue with how the capitalistic market works. Unfortunately, if there's capitalism, there's going to be corruption at some level. It's just going to be the way it is. It's not going to be as much as in a socialist environment, but it's going to be the problem. In terms of wokeness and education, you brought up the idea of teaching kids sexual education younger and younger. Well, here's the issue: we kind of have to, because kids grow up in an environment where they know about this stuff way earlier than we did. It's all on the internet. They see it all the time. They're going to have to learn about it. So you're going to teach these kids earlier and earlier. And it's not like all of a sudden we teach these kids and all of a sudden teen pregnancy is on the rise. We're not in a situation where we're teaching them sex too early and now they're just boning and making babies when they shouldn't be. That's not really what's happening. That's not what the data is showing. In terms of teaching diversified things, I mean, here's the thing about America. America holds the number one resource in the world that gives us the power that we have, and it's culture. We set the cultural standard. The rest of the world follows us. That's why these other countries will never surpass United States. Nobody looks at Chinese culture and says, yeah, that's what I want. Everybody wants to be Americanized. Everybody wants to have the American culture where they live. That's what they want. and we set that standard. In terms of countries like, you have all these world readers scoffing at us. Let them scoff. Their country's burning. The Russian economy is in shambles. He might be in power now, but he's done too much damage to even. He's gonna take Putin's gonna take the old Stalin method of disappearing out of nowhere, because he's not going to be in power any much longer if the things go the way they are. China's economy is in shambles, so we think China is this amazing power. They really are not. Their housing market is tanking. Their economy is tanking. They have maybe 10 years left before they hit a major recession that they might never come back from. Um, what we decide as a culture here in America makes a difference around the world, and that's why we have the influence that we do. Now, in terms of wokeness and having sensitivity and having things, we have to have that, just because there are different things showing up in the world. And I mean, when we were growing up, we never worried about, we never knew about LGBTQ or trans rights or any of that. But as we get older, those become more and more staple issues in the world that we have to take into account. I mean, these people are human. If we're living in a global society, in a society where we want to acknowledge everyone and everyone has fair rights, these people also deserve those rights. And unfortunately, when it comes to gaining rights, it's always come following a violent effect. The riots. There's always been a riot before some change has actually come into place. It's always been forced by some type of action. It doesn't come peacefully. It rarely comes peacefully. No major change in the United States has ever come without having some sort of physical altercation or actual violence occur, because that's when the government has to take people seriously. When they realize that people are no longer messing about, they want change and they need something done to help them, or to help the situation that they're in. So, riots will happen. That's part of society. That's part of society growing and part of society changing. That I don't think that has anything to do with woke culture. That has more to do with how society functions. And that's with every society in any part of the world. Always going to have a riot if things get that bad, and then either the riot gets crushed or the government changes and the riot dissipates. That's just the strength of the people. So I just wanted to go in and to give my 5 cents on that. What did you say, Gooch?
Well, the first thing is I agree with Tim. Although I think the pronouns is more of a respect thing, and I'm okay with it now. I wasn't sure how I felt about it probably a couple years ago. But now with the pronouns thing, it's just a respect thing. But I'm also not your echo chamber where I have to make you feel where I don't have to make you feel like safe. God, how am I going to say this? It's not my job to tiptoe around your triggers, right? So, like, I don't know that you were molested by your stepdad, right? And although in a workplace environment, there shouldn't ever be any kind of a joke or insinuation that should come up as far as that's concerned. I'll say just in good company, right? Friends sitting on the couch hanging out. I don't know that happened. It's not my job to worry about it either. So, yeah, I don't know what else to even put on that. That is just, I have a little bit of fogginess too for my sickness.
You're good, man. I mean,
oh, hold on. I got to read some of this to you first. So, as far as the education thing, here's a couple of books that parents have wanted banned from elementary schools across the country, and these are the worst ones. Who Will Help Jack Off the Horse? It's about a rabbit trying to get off a horse. Where Is My Dad? On the front, it's a African American family, and it's about exactly what you think it's about. A little girl asking her mother where her father is. Now, doesn't that just perpetuate a stereotype? I mean, honestly, why would you even have a book about that?
But that's a reality for a lot of kids, though.
Yeah, but why would you have a freaking book about it, dude?
It's the same reason that Sesame Street used to hit on topics about parents going to jail. Same reason that Sesame Street had all these topics that aren't technically kid topics, but it helps kids try to understand what's happening to them.
It's funny that you said that, because here's another one. The night dad went to jail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now this one's a bunny rabbit though. It's
Mhm.
not an African American family, but yeah. C is for consent. Elementary schools that book was in. These are not high school, middle school, elementary. Why is dad so mad? It touches on alcoholism and things like that. Bye bye binary. It's about a young baby trying to figure out if he is a boy or a girl. Who will make the pancakes? Short story about a young child whose father has multiple women over the course of a week in an elementary school. So here's the problem. I understand that there are children that do go through that, and I'm sure they need help, and I'm sure it's difficult to ask for help, or especially when you're that young. The thing is, though, there's no reason to corrupt other children at that age. The time to realize that there's more outside of your sphere of influence is not before your 7th birthday. It's probably when you're around 10, when you start going through puberty. That's when you need to start realizing that there's more outside of your life, and that the world is a bigger place, right? It's not the school's job to make kids under the age of 10 realize that there are kids that their dads go to jail, their dads beat their parents, that those kids get molested, that, sexual acts are performed in order to create children. That's not the school's job. That is not the school's job to teach that. I'm sorry. And there shouldn't be books in the school that even remotely hint at that in an elementary school. Middle school's fine. I understand middle school, puberty, all that stuff, but not elementary school. That's all I got to say about that.
Spicy, what did you have to say?
I mean, I'll tag onto that because I mean, I kind of agree with Gooch in a lot of the sense of that. I mean, I think as a society, like I said, as we've gotten more, interested in our own selfish desires slash just concerned about ourselves, not the community, we've kind of lost sight also in lieu of that in protecting the innocence of children. Too many times, I think now that we are imposing adult ideals or adult reasoning onto a child earlier than they're actually able to handle it. I think the preservation of innocence is something that is important in a child, and it should be kept as long as possible. I'm not saying keep your child locked up in a room closet until he gets his letter from Hogwarts, but he in general, like, I don't think that we need to try to adultify children much earlier than they're able to handle it. Like, we have legal standards for a reason. Like, you can't vote or join the military until you can't join the military until you're 17, technically, with parent consent, 18 when you're an adult. You can't vote until you're 18. You can't, currently now, at least in our state, you can't smoke until you're 21. You can't drink until you're 21 because they've compiled data, they've looked at reasoning capabilities. When do they think societally that this is appropriate ages for things like this? I know in Michigan, the age of consent for a sexual relationship, I believe, is 16. A lot of states have Romeo and Juliet laws when it's teenagers. Not that I'm advocating for like this, but because of the things that happen in society. But what concerns me is when you have educators or you have adults that, rather than being interested in, are they at the appropriate reading comprehension level, are they able to write good thoughts onto a paper, are they able to reason their math tables properly, do they know about some of the basic science that they're supposed to know at this age, that one of their primary concerns is, when is the earliest that I can start basically telling these kids that there are different gender identities, sexual orientations. This is, where babies come from, things that, I mean, if we think back to when we were kids, like, a lot of times we just hung out with other kids, like it's just what it was. Like, they were just another person to us. We couldn't really reason a lot of these concepts in our mind. And there is below a certain age, and like I think Gooch pointed out, the age of 7, I think that's typically a legal standard for like when a child is considered able to give a testimony, at least in certain cases legally. Um, there needs to be a like a hard line in the sand of like there are just a certain ages we don't talk about these things. Like there's no reason that a child below the age of puberty needs to be learning about sexual education. Like there is no tangible benefit in my mind that society has for that. Like it's kind of to build off what Gooch was saying, these spheres in society where like your view of the world, your sphere in society or your sphere of influence expands at certain times. Like, and that's when you're like, okay, I understand these concepts more, so my knowledge of the world grows. And like as I step up and I have a little more responsibility, my knowledge of the world grows because I now have other things that I can influence in my life. There's just a point where I will I'm just gonna have to draw a hard line in the sand sometimes, that there are just certain things being taught to children nowadays or that they are exposed to. And this isn't just about the education system. There is not enough internet protection for children. There's too much ease of access to internet for children, which I think is a parental issue, which goes into, unfortunately, the world is trying to raise kids more than parents are trying to raise kids sometimes nowadays. And basically the old adage that if you don't raise your kids, the world will do it for you. But there comes a time too where like education is there to educate kids like to a certain standard, but it is a parent's job to raise that child, and they if a parent does not want them exposed to certain things, they have every right to do so. Now maybe that means that they have to take them to a private school, a maybe they have certain religious values and they want to go to a religious school such as like a Catholic school or a Jewish school if that's their religion. But there are just certain things going on nowadays that I think the education system or the government is overstepping its bounds into trying to put certain concepts in front of a child before, in my opinion, they're ready. And sometimes being apparently without the parents' knowledge. And that has been talked about in multiple articles and in videos that have shown online.
So here's my counter argument to you then. I mean, back in the day, they used to have books where they did math problems for little kids based on talking about cotton picking Jimmy and how many bags of cotton did Jimmy pick. So that would nobody had any issues with that, but society's changed.
I mean, I think eventually people had an issue with that, and so they
Eventually,
took
yes.
the example
Yeah.
out of it.
So you have cases where even back in the day, you have these schools aren't perfect. Well, we may call it standardized education, but every district, every school, everyone. My experience going to school in Michigan will be vastly different from somebody that's going down in Florida or somebody that's going to school in Texas. This is not fully standardized. So there might be schools that teach certain things that may push the boundaries of what you're doing, but that could be just a fringe case that shows up. But at a certain time, if you're not comfortable with what the school is teaching you, then take your kid out and do homeschooling. You don't get to, if you don't like what's happening, take your kid out of homeschooling and put them in homeschooling and take them to private school. Because there's a limit. Government's always been involved in this education because it's free. It's government subsidized. If you don't like it, pay for it. That's what's going to happen. Like you don't get to make that choice because there've been like there's certain levels. So you talk about these kids, the books that you said, Gooch. The kids that can't relate to those books will have no understanding of it, and that book is going to go over their head. The only kids that book will actually affect are the kids that are actually going through something like that. Now, where that book was implemented, what if that book was implemented in the inner city schools, where a majority of the kids that are going to that school have a parent or have a parental figure that's in jail? Does that book not have any meaning for them? Versus you take that to a suburban white neighborhood and you teach it there, those kids aren't going to understand what this is about. They're never experienced it. But these kids who've seen their parents get locked up, uncles get locked up, like if they're teaching it in those communities, what's the problem with that? And we talk about whether or not, I have a different opinion when it comes to, what is taught in terms of sexual acts and things like that. I don't believe anybody is teaching how babies are made in elementary school. Sexual education is more than just how babies are made. Sexual education goes into a lot of health and body changes and things that happen to you. And some kids go through puberty a lot faster than others. Some people are leaving elementary school, going into middle school, already going through the puberty process. So we have to also be wary of that. What's wrong with getting a girl ready for what she thinks is about to come, especially if her parents aren't doing it? Because these schools can't go into your house and teach you and make sure that your parents are teaching you the stuff. So the school has an obligation to make sure that we're still covering this curriculum, so that way, in case you're deficient at home, we can try to cover it for you. That's all they're trying to do.
Okay, so here's the problem though, Raj. The ultimate argument here is it okay to teach these kids that stuff because they're going to do it anyways? Is that really what you believe, that that they're just going to do it anyways because in some way, shape, or form they're going to figure it out? Because I'm going to tell you that's not the experience I had.
It's this is not our neighbor. This is not our youth. We did not grow up like these kids are growing up now. It's not the same. Like, these kids have access to electronics that give them access to the internet from pretty much when they can walk and talk. Every parent that walks into my bank, their kid has a tablet with them, and not like some kiddie play on this tablet. I'm talking about a full-on iPad or Samsung tablet. They themselves go on the internet, go to YouTube, and look up whatever they want. Parent doesn't have to do anything. The kid can do it. And I'm seeing this on a daily basis. So like, we just need to understand this is not our world that we grew up in. 20 years ago is a whole different ballgame. We had to actually learn. So we had magazines back in the day. Okay?
Yeah.
Shit's free now.
True.
Shit's free, and it's available on the internet for anything. And here's the thing: do you want a teacher in a school teaching this, or do you want the kids learning from the internet? That's my question to you. So notice the conundrum they're in, right? This is not a case of, oh, we just want to do an FU to the parents and teach this anyway. They're battling basically how society is changing right now. And what they have to do is do this early and earlier, so that way these kids that are getting on the internet and learning things. We had a 6-year-old shoot a teacher, brought a gun to school, took the gun out and shot a teacher, pointed at her and shot her. Not like he was playing around with it and it accidentally went off. He went off and shot a teacher. These are not the same kids. These are not the same little humans that we were when we were younger.
Well, and with a situation like that, I would say that a lot of this comes down to, on all of these arguments, is the lack of parenting and like the substitution of essentially the internet or somebody else in lieu of the parents. So that's, I think, to me, that's a societal issue, that there's a lot of, basically, there's a multifaceted approach to that. You're not just going to fix it with one thing. I mean, a 6-year-old is going to typically, on most standards, have a hard time comprehending the full consequence of what happens if you were to bring a gun and shoot somebody, because they may have experienced, their experience with guns may be cartoons, something where there's a disconnect from reality. I'm not saying there aren't kids at certain ages that are going to have an issue where, they are, disturbed, or they're having some issue and they know full well what they're doing. Like, that can happen, obviously, but usually a 6-year-old is not going to have the same comprehension of the actions that they're taking, the consequences that come out of that, what happens to the person when you shoot them with a bullet, like an adult would, or like an older child at a certain point would. They just don't have certain comprehension levels sometimes. Obviously kids are sometimes smarter than we give them credit for, but there's still a limit to their foresight, like their ability to think through the whole thing and what's going to result as a cause of their actions. So, I mean, the kid bringing the gun to school, that 100% falls on the parents. That really comes down to the parent not following certain safety precautions or allowing the kid to have access to it, because there's no way that any 6-year-old should be able to get the gun. So, I mean, that was the tragedy in and of itself. That should have never happened. And in the sense that like if you don't, I mean, I agree with the idea that like, hey, if you don't like the way the public education is going, every right to pull your kids out of homeschool, go for it. Go for a private school, charter school, whatever you think fits better with what you would like your child to learn, because ultimately the way your child is raised is up to you. um but I to say that parents, if they don't like the education system, they don't really get to a say in or controlling what's taught in schools. That's what school boards are for, and why parents come to those meetings. There's absolutely a say that parents should have in the public education sphere. They started teaching tomorrow what they did back during the era of Jim Crow and segregation. you know are we going to tell them that, say somebody said nowadays that, hey, that's fine again, public education says we're going to start teaching this again. Are we also going to say at that point that parents, if they don't like it, they should just take their kids out and homeschool and they don't have any say in the education realm? I know that that's a very unlikely scenario, but devil's advocate of like, if they determine that, okay, well, let's go back this route, well, parents don't really have a say in what's taught in school, so you can take your kids out of school or leave them there.
So why is so how do we expect these parents that are uncomfortable with the kids being taught this in a school, how are we expecting them to teach this at home? If they're uncomfortable, the kids having this conversation with somebody else that they don't even have to be involved in, why do we believe that they're going to teach this on their own? And especially in a society where both parents are working full time, because I mean that's what we're in. We're in a society where both parents have to work full time to make ends meet and live a comfortable life.
Yeah, typically. I don't think that it's necessarily the equation of, if they're uncomfortable with this being taught by a teacher, they're not going to do it on their own because they're working. I mean, if it's an important conversation they need to have with their children, most parents will find a time. And I think ultimately it is up to the parents when their child learns this information, when like this, people may not have certain information. We come across people in our daily lives all the time. It's like, I didn't know this until I was this age. Well, I know it when I was this age. I didn't have this information. I didn't learn till much later on, because it's just the way that they were raised, whether it was their parents' style of being more conservative and that they held things from them longer until they told them the information. Some parents maybe being more like free with the information of like, I'll tell it to you, you do with it what you will, at an earlier age.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the key is that it is entirely up to the parents to determine important things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That if a parent is like, I am uncomfortable with my 6-year-old child learning about sex education, that should not happen. They're like, we need the parents' consent to tell them about this, because back when we were in school, I mean, they're like, hey, we're having this class, you need to get this permission slip signed by your parents. And if they have any questions, they can call us, we'll tell them what's being talked about. There's just too many examples nowadays of, even if they're like, oh yeah, we covered this in class, but then parents are like, well, what's the curriculum? And there's been cases where they're just like, well, we don't provide the curriculum to parents. Like, so now most of the time in most districts, I know that you can be like, hey, what's being taught? But there have been increasing numbers of parents going to school board meetings being frustrated because they're like, my kid's coming home with this stuff and I had no idea that this was even being taught in class, or like nobody's communicated that these are the kinds of things that they're learning. Or you have a teacher who maybe is in a subject that has nothing to do with that topic. And so to parents, it feels more of like an agenda of that person trying to bring in what they would like to teach them versus what they're actually paid to teach them.
Jimmy.
So I'm going to start off with just because you can doesn't mean you should. Personally, like, if hot button topics are going to be discussed in school that don't specifically revolve around your core curriculum, parents should be required to be notified, such as sexual education. Prior to the class starting, parents should be notified. Parent has the right on when they want to expose their children to such information, and it is not the school's job to do that. So if the school is going to teach it, they should be required to notify parents prior and have a signed form of the parental consent for their children to receive this information. So that's my base on that stuff in particular. As far as especially politically leaning, in the state of Michigan now, a minor can receive gender affirming care without parental consent because they have determined that a child is of mental capacity to make these long-term life decisions. If a child who is under the age of 18, and this is going to sound like super wild because this fact is actually super wild, a child under the age of 18 can get gender affirming care without the consent of a parent, and they are of apparently right mind to make these decisions that can be irreversible. Why are we concerned with kids with guns, right? If they can decide, oh, I want to get a sex change, or I want to take hormone blockers, they don't know what that is. They can't comprehend the long-term ramifications of these permanent changes. If you start messing with these hormones at a time in which your body physiologically is not prepared for it, you can do long-term damage that can be irreversible. I can't think of her name right now, but Jordan Peterson had a podcast with her, right? She's getting ousted by the trans community. So she's 18 or 20 or something right now. She had a double mastectomy when she was 14 or 15 because it was gender affirming care in Canada. Her therapists were under the state governance as far as legal obligations to not question her about her gender, but reinforce it. She believed that she was a male, and this is pre-puberty. So she started taking puberty blockers to prevent estrogen formation and female sexual organ development. Ended up getting a double mastectomy. And when she was sitting in she was genuinely interested in psychology. So she started college, took some psychology classes, and found out more about childhood and adolescence development from psychological and biological aspect of it. And at that point, she realized what she had done and she couldn't go back. When she was 14 years old, she signed a waiver stating that she knew the ramifications of a double mastectomy, that she would not be able to breastfeed a child if she wanted to have a child, and if she could have a child because of the hormone blockers that prevented the estrogen from developing her uterus and her eggs and her reproductive cycle. And she realized what she had done at that point. And so now she's working through lawsuits to go against because her parents, legally under the obligations of the country of Canada, had to also support her throughout this transition. She now regrets it. And she is receiving no help from her therapist, surgeons. Right now, she had a she did have a nipple transplant when she had a double mastectomy to try and make her chest look somewhat typical of a human, just without the breast tissue. And at her current stage, she has to continuously wrap her chest and clean her chest because of the wounds are oozing fluid that will stain her clothing and her bed. So these are the real ramifications of a child who cannot comprehend long-term effects when they don't have the mental capacity to see that far ahead. And I think it's horrific that these are things that are being taught as okay, that children can make these decisions. They can't. I wouldn't hand a 5-year-old a firearm, just as I wouldn't trust a 5-year-old to determine, oh, so you're biologically born a male, but you think you're a girl. Hey, let's discuss this. Not, all right, let's stop your hormones. No, if they truly identify as a female, they continue, because there was a study that was coincidentally, I believe, out of Canada, that the psychologist is now getting ostracized for, was that children who experience gender dysphoria if you just leave them alone, so this happened in, I think, the 70s or 80s. If you leave them alone, they will typically align with their gender assigned at birth. As a part of that, about 80% of those who did align with their gender of birth were lesbian or gay, but they were confident in their body, because puberty send in all kinds of mixed signals throughout your body and your brain. You're going through all sorts of physical changes. You can't tell left from right half the time. And allowing a child to make these decisions who struggles alone in their self-identity and who are then receiving gender affirming care for gender dysphoria, as it was once called, but the woke culture removed it from the DSM-5, that it's no longer a mental illness or mental disability as it used to be diagnosed as. So that I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. And some of these books, not necessarily the ones that Gooch was talking about, but there are other ones that are explicitly, essentially 50 Shades of Gray, but for prepubescent teens, right? Going through these sexual activities that are in libraries. Most notably, this book was called Flamer. It was brought up in one of the Detroit area schools because of the explicit content. And it was not a party line split on this, right? There were Christians and Muslims in the community that went to the school board to fight to get this book removed. Because, and there were Republicans and Democrats who are like, no, like this isn't okay to allow in a youth library. So if these things are going to be available, when you were a kid, you'd always kind of snicker when you went to the video store, like, oh, they have that little back corner section, right? All the adult films are in there. I remember like Family Video had this little like back room that had a curtain across the door. If they're going to have these books provided in public access, because I don't support banning books, right? People should have free access to whatever book you want to read. But I think there's an age appropriate and a developmental appropriate level to understanding these books. And then the books like the ones about kids going to jail and everything. To me, I mean, it's unfortunate that we can't live in a utopian society, but to me, it's unfortunate that we have to have these books because the parents are failing to explain to their children in a way that they can understand it. And that, that's why we have school counselors, guidance counselors, teachers, to help kids understand the world around them, not to manipulate and mold their brains to a false understanding of what culture wants, right? That's why Supreme Court justices aren't voted in and they don't have term limits, because it is not their job to make decisions based upon what's happening right now today. It's their job to make decisions based upon what has happened historically. And as generations and society changes throughout time, if they all of a sudden made decisions based upon something that happened yesterday, it would absolutely destroy the foundation of the Supreme Court. And that's why court rulings are ruled based upon historical things. And if it is a new ruling that, let's say there's no lawsuit that was previously brought up on the topic, they do consider what's happening in society, and they consider things of what happened historically. Granted, history can be dark, not always equal for everyone, but that's taken into account. So they're like, oh, this specific group, in this ruling that happened in the early 1800s didn't, it ruled against them for whatever it may be. Just because it ruled against them doesn't mean that the current sitting Supreme Court can't rule the other way. But it's, I don't know, it's frustrating to see. And it's frustrating to see that the manipulation of science through woke culture, right? So, you have gender and sex. Sex is a construct, or gender is a psychological construct of sex, right? It's how you identify. So maybe to each their own. Me personally, biologically speaking, because even evolutionary speaking, you need two sexes, right? You have your female sex and you have your male sex, and excluding like clownfish and other amphibians and animals that can change their sex based upon the survival of their species, I think we're going too far with people. Because, for instance, and this is probably something that would frustrate some communities, but I do not agree with this statement as coming from transhub.org.au as the search for on Google, can men menstruate? Right? It says having a period is not a feminine thing, and people of all genders menstruate, including non-binary people, agender people, and even plenty of men. Biologically, it is impossible to have a menstrual cycle in a man. And this is stuff that's being taught as fact. If there's a trans man who
No, This is not being taught as fact. Nobody is teaching kids that men can menstruate. That's not happening.
No,
This
I'm
is
not
being taught by
talking
the internet. Yes.
about
If you
teaching kids this, but kids who are questioning, oh,
Mhm.
can these things happen? And then they find these things and they're like, oh yeah, men can menstruate. No,
No,
they
that's
can't.
where the
Men,
doctor comes into play. So you were talking about how these kids can get gender affirming therapy. That is true. I believe it was with Prop 3 that just passed in Michigan. But here's the difference. It's not like the kid can just walk into a clinic and say, "Yeah, I'd like to be a boy," and then they just take care of business. No, you have to go through a panel of doctors, a panel of psychologists, and then those psychologists all have to agree that this is not a mental issue that she's going through in terms of a traumatic issue, that either she was whatever happened to her. They have to say that, okay, she honestly believes that it is her right to be a male and that's what she wants to do. It's not a simple process, and not everyone gets approved. This is not
but
a you walk into the clinic and you're good to go.
she can do it without parental consent.
Yeah, I think the whole goal here, Raj, is that they should just be 18. Period.
Yeah,
I can live
like-
with that. I can live with that. But here's the issue with being 18 is that the preformative years of a child happen during high school. That's when they transition into adulthood. Basically, high school is the social point where people transition into becoming an adult.
But there's society and there's biology.
I'm not arguing with the biological aspect of it. I don't believe that you should. Both sides have fucked with science to get whatever thing that they want. It happens no matter what side of the spectrum that you're on. Woke culture, conservative culture, it doesn't matter. Everybody uses science to their own means to create whatever message they want. I don't believe biologically there are two genders for me. There's male and female. What you decide you are is your personal preference, and it's a respect thing. If I say, okay, you are, if you tell me that you want to be called a man, I will call you a man. But biologically, you were a female, if that's what you were before. When the doctors cut you open, you have female anatomy. That's how it works. For me, science is rock solid. It doesn't change based on what your preference is. But we also have to take into account science is not perfect either. And they're trying to create solutions for nuanced things that we never had to deal with before. So when you have a kid that's coming in and saying, I feel like I want to kill myself because I don't feel like I am who I am. And if I can't get this done, then I'm going to find a way to just kill myself because I can't be who I am. What's your option? You want to lock her up?
No,
Put her in a mental
therapy, but it's not. it's
Therapy.
not to give them.
Nobody gets to this point without therapy not working.
No, but it's a therapy should be a thing about exploring why, not affirming an irrational mental state.
Yeah, but who's affirming? Therapists don't just go in and say, "Oh, this girl walks in and says I'm a guy," and they said, "Yep, you're a guy. Let's go from there."
So why wouldn't you
questions.
set it up as like a race? Then? If you're a 14-year-old person, whoever, Set it up as a race. That means in 4 years, you'll be 18, you can have your surgery. Your birthday is the finish line, right? And for 4 years, you can do whatever the hell you want. I don't care if you wear dresses. I don't care if you, want to strap a banana on the inside of your pants and make you think that you got a schlong. Whatever, dude. They can do whatever the hell they want in school because really they can. Schools don't care anymore as long as you're not showing cleavage, basically, which that's a whole nother topic. But so they can do whatever the heck they want, right? So you set it up as a finish line. They go through therapy for 4 years. And I understand that's their puberty years. If it's a female that says they're a male, they're going to grow breasts. They're going to have a menstrual cycle, right? And you won't be blocking it. But 4 years is a long time. It's a lot of development in the head. And even if that was a genetically female person, they're not even fully developed until they're 21. Genetically males aren't even fully developed until they're 25.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the issue that I'm not saying one side is right or wrong. For me personally, 18 is the marker for me. I don't consider you to be able to make these decisions until you're 18, but I don't live the life of somebody who feels that confused. I don't live the life of somebody who goes through high school not feeling like I am.
But those people, I truly believe, are stuck in echo chambers where all these people are like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're the victim. Oh, yada
And
yada," and you
it's
can't
a
do
societal
that.
pressure.
Well, you have one side of society that's saying that you're wrong, there's something wrong with you, and then you have another part of society that's willing to accept them. So they're going to go towards the side that accepts them. Doesn't matter what the echo chamber
The
is.
side that accepts them, though, is extremist. When you come up to someone that doesn't accept it, I go, whatever, and walk away. Those people that they go and they seek out, they're extremists, and they say, oh, yeah, now you got to do all this other stuff. And that's the woke culture, man. That's the toxicity inside of what could be a good movement right there.
But what are your options? There's not enough moderate people willing to have these conversations. It's one side or another.
I think there are enough moderate people, but no one wants to talk to them because both sides are so extreme still, right? It's just like politics. Everything's so extreme. Most of us here are moderates, honestly. We have a lot of
Is that right, Tim?
Well, maybe not Tim. But we have a lot of different views on social things, and we have a lot of different views on economic things. The problem is the moderates get drowned out because the voices of the two sides are louder. And when it comes to this particular topic, although, people that have more conservative nature are not without sin, the people that have more of a liberal nature with the woke culture have the louder voices. They attack people of influence. They attack figures, public figures, so that they can get a foothold. And then it's a big deal for a month, and then it's nothing. So, Danny Masterson, here's a great one. That's someone that we grew up with, right? Watching him in that Danny Masterson, that 70s show, Hyde, The Ranch.
Okay.
Right? We grew up with that guy. Like, he was on TV, and he got accused of sexual assault by a few females. They're going through the court cases right now. Last I heard, it actually got thrown out. I don't know if anyone looked it up. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, there was no grounds at all. So his life is ruined. He'll never be able to, he couldn't be on that 90s reboot, nothing like that. And yeah, his life is just ruined now because someone decided that they wanted to say that he sexually assaulted them, yet there's no evidence of it, right? And hold on, I'm going to look up the trial real quick.
Of course, there's going to be stuff like this. It's going to happen. I mean, but there are also cases where people like Larry Nassar come out. Monsters. People like...
Okay, but that was a monster.
Yes.
And truly, honestly, I get it. You should trust your doctors, right? But he was examining female patients without gloves on. You, as a female, I feel like you would know if somebody had a glove on or not when they're touching you in certain areas, right? How did it go on for that long?
These are kids too.
Well,
But
There
their
were like
parents for some of these exams were also present in the examination room.
I did not know that.
I doubt he didn't use gloves for that one, but
But
it's
these
this is part of it.
internal
Mhm.
back realignments were happening with some parents inside of the examination room without question. Because they also just believe that, oh, apparently this is just a thing. Until they finally realized that it was not, and then the
Mhm.
university trying to cover it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's been cases of all over. I mean, Mr. Puddin Pops also got caught. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
that got caught up. People, the girls and the women back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s who couldn't speak up because speaking up meant that your job was gone. Finally, are in a culture where the people they can call out their abusers in
But
public.
so I guess, like the Me Too movement was actually like psychologically interesting, right?
Mhm.
So the impact that the Me Too movement has had has actually decreased the amount of teenage sex, right? A part of
Mhm.
that in society because, oh, if I do this, like teens are dumb, but they're also smart,
Mhm.
right? Teens can be clever, but they realize that, oh, if I have sex with this girl, right, and then it's cool, like you're in high school having sex, you go tell your buddies, and then she gets pissed off and says he raped me.
No, it's definitely a stressor for us too. I mean, when we were in our date,
Right?
like when we were dating and stuff, and we're going meeting people, like it's always a stress
Yeah.
because
What if you break up and then they have some red flags about them, and they go and say, oh, so and so raped me, or I was under the influence, so I couldn't make XYZ decisions when these behaviors occurred.
yeah, but without proof, nothing's gonna happen. And if they're lying about it, then they go to prison.
Not
No,
not
they do
always.
not.
Yeah, yes, they do. There's laws
Women have a
now.
lot of power in
Mhm.
ruining a man's future.
So Masterson was a mistrial.
A
Just so you know.
mistrial. So
Yep.
yeah, so it wasn't like he was let go. It was just a
But
mistrial, probably.
the accusation's never going away.
His life is ruined, and we don't know if they were all true.
And
And
there
a
are
jury of his peers apparently were split and didn't all agree that they were true.
Yeah, so it was split. Unfortunately, that's how
and
court
see
works, especially when you're a big shot celebrity.
Is
yeah,
it unfortunate though?
so things like
Yeah, I
that.
mean, you're
So
dealing
who's it
with
unfortunate for? Is it
for him.
unfortunate for why is it? Well, it was a mistrial. He got off, so he walks free. They could.
No, but his reputation's hurt, like you said. His
Oh yeah,
reputation's hurt.
but if those girls actually were sexually assaulted, that's
Mhm.
messed up,
Yes,
right?
and then you have to run it again. They have to fight for a second trial.
But if they weren't, then this was the correct outcome. It's
Here's the issue.
so
Here's the issue with these cases, though. When something happens years ago, there's not going to be evidence. It's going to be he said, she said, text or images or whatever they could pull up. That's it. There's no DNA.
and
These people didn't get rape kits done. There's stuff.
historically the courts rule in favor of the female,
Yeah, but that's the
whether
bias of human beings. But still, what is the penalty? I mean, you get perjury, isn't it?
but
Is
So, no, I
perjury
mean, I
lying
can-
to
You
I
court?
might
tell
not,
you-
dude. Honestly, you might not. That
So
one girl
essentially-
that ruined that one kid, that high school football star's life, and then she came out 20 years later and said that he didn't actually do anything to me.
So essentially, there's no penalty to assign to somebody that I'm aware of unless you charge them with filing a false police report. That could be a penalty if it's found that the woman lied.
It's called wasting police time and perverting the course of justice.
It's
those are the
essentially
charges.
filing a false report.
Yeah.
So essentially, filing a false police report, or if you testified something that was determined to be false in a trial, you could be found guilty of perjury. But those are the only penalties right now. There's no specific enhanced penalty for filing a false rape allegation or anything like that. And so it's kind of one of those things where, so like you said early on, the concept of Me Too, of people being able to speak up against abusers, is good in its own right. You know, the casting couch culture in Hollywood that everybody knows exists, where basically things were done or acts for promises of roles or all these other things, you know, the whole Harvey Weinstein issues and stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that culture unfortunately was pervasive, and it probably still is today. You know, just because this stuff got brought to light doesn't mean it goes away, because you have to have people that are willing to talk about it. But and so the idea of being able to be comfortable bringing forward the allegations if it happened to you, totally good with that. You know,
Mhm.
the notion of believe all women, that goes with a caveat. And it's not just women that are assaulted. There are men who are assaulted as well. I mean, you know, that's obviously it's not as publicized. It may not happen as frequently, but men can be assaulted as well. It's not exclusive.
It's the rates in which it happens. I think over the course of history,
Correct.
men have been the aggressors in most of these
Oh
cases.
yeah, don't get me wrong.
In
I mean,
over
if you looked
90%,
at
like,
sexual assaults, you're not going to find that there are more assaults against men than women.
no, it's just not going to be that way.
No, and so that's why when I say women, like it's because that's the vast majority of like the assaults that are reported.
I mean, for the longest time in this country, and I mean even in some countries now, you could rape your wife and you were legally allowed to do so.
Correct, and then
She
the
was your
law
wife.
changed.
Yeah, so like there are things that have been in place for a long time as a society where men have had all the power and they've abused it. So now it's getting to the point where the women have all the power and now they feel like they can abuse it now too to get back at men. And that's what it feels like with a lot of the woke movement and Me Too movement. But the issue is when you abuse that power, you take away from the women that actually have been abused and need that power to wield.
Every time there's a false allegation that's proven to be false, you know, it takes credibility away from actual allegations that come out.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole, I don't like blanket statements like, you know, just believe everybody at face value, because obviously it's not that you believe everybody, it's that you take the allegations seriously and then you do your due diligence and investigation to see if you can find evidence to corroborate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, that's the due diligence of the legal system, police, lawyers,
but
prosecutors.
These are just hard cases to do, especially if it
They're
didn't happen
hard.
immediately.
A
If there wasn't a rape kit or anything done, there's nothing you can do.
The thing is, I mean, the psychological impacts that go through, like somebody who's been abused, somebody who is a victim of an assault, the psychological impacts there, you know, the shame, guilt, anything else. And obviously, you know, these are tough situations for anyone involved. These are, like you said, tough cases because somebody may not report right away. They may not get the confidence to report until a week or two later. And like you said, when there is a lack of evidence, it is very difficult because essentially it is a he said, she said, it is a word of mouth. There's not a lot of corroborating evidence to go forward with it. Obviously, technology and crime investigations has gotten a lot better, but there's still always going to be limitations. And, you know, there's going to be trials that happen every day that, you know, the person who did it, you know, gets prosecuted and convicted, but then they may walk because there wasn't enough evidence. Not necessarily that people were convinced that they didn't do it, but that there wasn't enough to meet the burden of proof that they could prosecute and convict them on it.
So I have something here that, just because we talked about the allegations of what it can cost a woman for filing a false claim. In some countries or some states like California and stuff, it's a 6 months in county jail for false allegation. In Michigan, it's 20 years in prison. So in Michigan, if you do a false claim and you're proven to be submitting a false claim, you spend 20 years in prison.
Specifically for a sexual assault?
For false claim of sexual assault.
The problem is the prosecutor has to go after it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that Michigan has made this step forward in that. For the longest time, people were saying that if you knowingly make a false allegation, especially of that nature, because of the damage to reputations, because of all the time and resources that you've put into it, because of all of the damage that it can do, then the woman should pay the exact same penalty as the man would have.
Here's the thing. The prosecutor is going to want to do it because it saves face for him too. If a court case goes out and it's proved that was a false claim, he's going to want to double down and get her to go to prison.
Well, 100%. I think if you do make that false report and it's provable and you can be charged with it, you absolutely should be charged with it.
And I don't care about any, if you do a false claim and it's proven to be false, 20 years in prison. Just go. Leave society. I'm done with you. Because not only have you negated all the work that's being put in place to protect actual victims, you're now trying to ruin the life of an innocent person and put him on a sexual registry, which basically ruins everything he can do with his life. So I don't have any sympathy for you. Go straight to prison.
Well, and obviously, you know, a lot of our lot of our like kind of talk on woke culture right now has revolved around, you know, obviously with juveniles, with the education system, you know, with the sexual education, the gender identity, that kind of stuff. You know, we've talked about now into the a little bit of the Me Too, the allegations involved with that. So, I mean, I guess, what do you guys think are some other areas in where woke culture is kind of taking over in society?
Public policy, bro.
Public policy in what sense?
So a lot of these, I guess I'll just call them woke extremists, would be the best way to say it. Generally have a socialist view on things, right? And so we see things like, what's it called? Chad in Portland? Is that what it is?
Chaz,
Chaz.
Well, no,
Yeah.
they had to change it from Chaz because there was a legal connotation when you call yourself an autonomous zone that they had to change.
Gotcha. So
Because
whatever
went
they
to
call
Chad,
it
I
now,
think.
whatever they call it now, you know, that's literally the echo chamber that we were talking about, right? So those people decided that they have public policies that they want implemented. They took over an entire section of a city, which is domestic terrorism, and then set those policies in place. And in like the first week, I think the mayor of that place raped somebody. Seriously, like legitimately. And then they have shootings all the time, and then they get mad that the police don't respond, and the police are like,
That's an anarchist state. That's not even like an independent. It just basically becomes an anarchical society where there's no rules, no actual legal matters.
well, you know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I was laughing so hard when I saw this. So like the US Marshals and stuff, basically they have like unmarked vehicles just parked around there, and whenever these people basically walk out of the autonomous zone, they just take them down. They're just arresting them slowly. Like you might wake up one morning and like half your friends are gone because they went out to go scavenge for food, like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something.
It was Tarkov, bro. That was
Yeah, it's
Tarkov.
And the U.S. Marshals are taking them down.
The
So
U.S.
mine
Marshals are the USEC. They're just going in,
They're
just taking
group
out
labs.
scabs.
So my understanding of that is it's not a thing anymore. They dismantled that a long time ago here. Because the issue was, yeah, they were facing that when they set this up, they were not allowing emergency vehicles through the blockade. So if they had like a shooting or something like that, they were like, hey, they're telling these people, hey, you got to come help them. And yet they were not allowing police or first responders to come in and assist because the whole thing was founded on anti-police,
Yep.
you know, that kind of deal there. And so they were trying to reach out for like international aid for like food and water and stuff like that because they wanted to declare themselves an independent zone. And like you said, I mean, it's an anarchist state. It's domestic terrorism at its finest. But I think where the important distinction to make with what you said, that with public policy, where wokeness is coming in, that the people in the government positions in that city allowed it to happen as long as they did. Every bit of negativity that happened in that area that they took over is squarely on their shoulders because they allowed it to continue.
No, I think they wanted it to continue because here's the thing: what they proved, without police, EMS, law and order, it turns into that, and that's all they did. They didn't have to do anything. They proved their own point against them.
True.
Well, to a point, but except for the fact that there's been articles on, like, especially like Portland, Seattle, like some major metropolitan cities like that, that they're like, I don't want to say their commissioner's board or like their it's got like their city commission and stuff like that. They are entirely for the policies of like less intrusion from the police, less funding, all this other stuff, basically to limit the actions and stuff that they can take. And so on the one hand, you had some people that are like, yeah, let this be a thought experiment, or let this be an experiment to show this is exactly what happens when you don't have those kinds of first responders out there on the road. But the other ones were just like, man, they're really making a stand. Like they're basically like putting it to the system and saying like, this is what we want.
I mean, it can be what you want, but we saw from the outside looking in, we saw exactly what happens when there's no law and order.
Oh, it was a total
Yeah.
mess.
And it didn't take very long. It all took like a couple days for everything to fall apart. Like,
yeah, and I think kind of to tag on to the beginning of the argument, because I mean I know we've been kind of around the loop here and we've been talking about some of these topics for a while. Um, Wokeness in itself nowadays is the basis for a lot of organizations and a lot of groups to try to garner support, because I think there's a sense that if you're not for social justice causes, or if you're not actively participating in it, then you're against it and you're a part of the problem, in the sense that, oh, hey, if you don't donate to our organization or you don't help out with this, then you must be exactly the opposite and you're the people that we need to be worried about and go against. And so there's this draw from these organizations that, unfortunately, even if they had a good founding message, like we talked about in the beginning with a couple of them, it is a miscarriage of what is supposed to be done. Like, I mean, a perfect example. I mean, there's a few different interviews I've seen online of people just going across the streets in these neighborhoods asking people, hey, BLM, are you for the organization? And these people in the neighborhoods are like, absolutely not. And they're like, why? What's the reasoning? And their biggest thing that they said was, when you have articles that come out about like one of the founding members of that organization buying these multi-million-dollar mansions, using funds from these, a lot of people are like, I haven't seen a single penny of that reinvested into our neighborhood.
yeah.
So it essentially turned into this big Ponzi scheme of donate all this money. So these individuals got rich, but there was actually no no community reinvestment in any resources, or at least not on any widespread scale that anybody can see tangibly right now.
Mm-hmm.
When did it become a good idea to market, like you were talking about, spicy, like politicians and some of these bigger companies? When did it become the better idea to market towards the minority? When you market towards a majority of your consumer. I mean, and I think a lot of this woke culture, some of the things that are being pushed for these bigger companies pushes away their normal consumer.
Well, and I agree, because I think that what we're seeing a lot in some of these organizations is these kind of woke ideals, these like political agendas that they're pushing in their marketing. First of all, in my opinion, it's just a bad idea as a business, because you're going to ostracize some portion of your base that you're in the for most organizations, for most businesses, you're in the business of producing a good or service. Like, that is solely what you're there for. I could care less what your top executives' initial political views are or their individual beliefs, because I kind of just want to buy coffee. That's what I'm here for. So it's one of those things where I think it goes back to what you were saying, that sometimes one group, even if they are a smaller group of people, a minority group of people in society, that sometimes they're the voices are the loudest because they're screaming at people, they're shouting them down, they're trying to cancel them. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, guys, like cancel culture is huge nowadays. I don't like your opinion, so instead of me taking the responsibility of trying to manage my own offense to a situation or my dislike of it, I've now placed the burden of responsibility on other people to be responsible for my feelings, which is not a realistic goal here. We're only in control of our own actions. But the problem is they go after these corporations, they try to cancel them, they try to get negative publicity, boycotts, all these things. And so out of fear of that kind of repercussion, because I mean, social media, you got a lot of reach with that, they want to curtail to some of these marketing schemes because they are afraid, essentially, of the repercussions from those groups. It may not be a large group, but if you got a loud enough voice and you get it out to enough people, you can do some real damage.
I mean, people have been boycotting companies forever, and it's
And I'm
not
not saying
something new.
boycotting shouldn't happen,
Mhm.
because there's definitely appropriate ways to do that. Or if you don't like something, you have a right to not purchase those goods and services.
So they put it on the market. Like we saw, there's a video of Fairlife and how they treat their animals. And this wasn't even a PETA thing. It was just Fairlife. They're taking these calves from their mothers, like literally clubbing them on the head, breaking their legs, like doing all kinds of messed up shit to animals. I mean, you don't need to do that, but that's what they were doing. and it was a whole issue where people didn't want to buy from Fairlife anymore, and that's perfectly fine. And the message went on the internet, the video came out on the internet, and their sales tanked. And that's generally what happens with any of these companies. Look, it happens with both sides of the spectrum. So we have to understand this is not just a left side thing or a right side thing. Both sides take advantage of this, and it's basically, I think, what is it, DeSantis that didn't want to have Disney in Florida anymore because Disney didn't support whatever he was saying or was against what he was saying. That's too bad. Disney's like half your GDP.
It was kind of funny when he forced them to comply to Florida OSHA.
It's just a petty thing.
Well, and I think he had a I mean, obviously, like if you lose Disney, like you're losing, like you said, half of Florida's GDP.
Nobody's coming to Florida after that.
No, very few people are coming to Florida for anything at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Spring
But
break is all you got.
Well, I will say, I think one of the good moves that he did do is kind of, I mean, he kind of put the screws to Disney in the sense of like, look, you think that you have all this influence over us, which they are a big player in Florida. They're the biggest player in Florida. But they're the special protections and the special accommodations that were afforded to Disney for the longest time essentially allowed them to almost operate like a city state.
They have their own territory, their own police force
Yep.
that answers to Disney.
So they don't
You go
have
to
their own,
Disney
they
jail.
don't have their own police. They have security. So
They have Disney jail. Mickey's gonna take you to the slammer, bro.
so they have a security force. But then they also, like at the parks, they have actual like the county deputies that come and assist with the park and everything. But I agree with the fact that, look, a company, regardless of how big they are, should not enjoy as many special protections and special exemptions that Disney did, because it allowed their sphere of influence to start bleeding out into a lot of like other parts of Florida, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people in Florida were like, no, like Disney's down for this, but we're not, and this is our state.
Like hiding multiple CSC allegations between Disney cruises and employees of those, and well, between employees and visitors within the parks and hotels as well.
I mean, don't get me wrong, like this could happen at any organization. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
Disney is like unique in these scenarios, because this happens in organizations all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like Raj said before, the bigger an organization gets, the more corruption you're going to find at some level of it.
Mm-hmm. Now,
do you
believe,
kind of like Murphy's Law? I mean, it's going to happen if you get more.
I wanna put a question out there for you guys in terms of, so we have Antifa and BLM on one side of the woke spectrum. Do you think that QAnon is another spectrum of woke?
Yeah, it's conservative woke.
It's conservative woke, right?
I'd say it is. I feel like it fits more into like conspiracy theory territory.
Mm-hmm.
Like QAnon's a weird group, man. Like I don't even know a ton about it.
Because all Trumpists, well, let's say QAnon, how do I say this? A lot of QAnon conspiracy theories are also Trumpists, but not all Trumpists are QAnon theory conspiracists.
Well, I think that's also kind of one of those kind of attacks from the other side too. Like there's a lot of media outlets that will say that anybody that supports Trump is basically a white supremacist, or there's some kind of QAnon believer. Mm-hmm. QAnon's a weird group, dude. Like the stuff that they put out there, I mean, we're talking like lizard people to the center of the earth level weird.
Mm-hmm. They're flat earthers. Like,
no, don't get me wrong. Like they would probably be one of the better examples of like they're not woke by society's definition, but they are kind of their own like kind of little extremist level group. I haven't heard of anything specifically. Maybe I'm just not on the news enough, because I don't get on the news a ton. It stresses me out sometimes. But
what about Proud Boys and Boogaloos?
So Proud Boys, that's an interesting one, because the thing is, the Proud Boy group, the way it started was not. So I think currently, if I'm not mistaken, it's listed as a white supremacist group on the federal databases.
Yeah.
So the Proud Boy group, a lot of that started from, I forgot what's that dude's name, like Gavin McInnes, I think.
Yeah, McInnes, you're right. That's so creepy.
Gavin McInnes, he's kind of started that group, and I think I've seen interviews with him that even said that like he's like, this group took off in a way I did not expect. He's like, I started the group as kind of like a political kind of talk group of like these guys that have these same ideals that are like, hey, I'm not agreeing with like the Antifa stuff, the other stuff that's going on. It was kind of the other side of the aisle's response to it. But then I think the people just kind of took it and ran with it. I haven't heard of too many incidents of like the Proud Boys being involved in much of anything, or at least I haven't heard their names in a while. I mean, I've heard Antifa's name in a while either. Because there was, it's this kind of like assumption that the Proud Boys and everybody was a white supremacist group, and maybe there were examples of some people that did say that, but I can't just generalize a group like that saying that, hey, this is what they're about when I don't really know what they're about. You know, with Antifa, like you can clearly see people in the black garb running around, you know, fighting people, burning buildings, that kind of stuff. It's like I can see your actions, like, and maybe there were on the Proud Boys level. I gotta look more of it up. I just personally don't know a ton about it. I knew a little bit about the founding of it with Gavin McInnes's group and how he kind of was telling somebody like, "Yo, this kind of just morphed into its own thing, and I'm not even really involved in it anymore." They just took it and ran with it. Boogaloo Boys, I think it's kind of either associated with or similar to Proud Boys, or maybe that's the more.
I think they're the more liberal version of the Proud Boys.
The Boogaloo Boys?
I think the Boogaloo Boys are.
So if I'm not mistaken, Boogaloo Boys they're more like left-leaning, but they're also like left-leaning people that are like same
Second
thing,
Amendment.
like Second Amendment, like plate carriers, rifles, all this stuff, marching around, doing stuff, and they're doing it legally. But that's kind of their response to it. So the funny thing is, Boogaloo, I looked, there was a dance back in the day called the Electric Boogaloo.
Boogaloo, yeah.
So the Electric Boogaloo, but then all of a sudden this term got coined as like a representation for the impending civil war of the United States between the right and the left. Everybody's like, you ready for the Boogaloo Boys?
So did this dance involve you packing a sack and bugging out, or what?
No.
Running out of the dance.
I have not found a resource for the Electric Boogaloo, but I've also just didn't want to hurt my eyes with what that might entail.
Well, I'll learn it and I'll do it for everybody on the next podcast.
Oh, bro, I would love nothing more.
The Electric Boogaloo.
Yep. He's like, this
Pack
is my
your
dance
bags
to
and
prepare.
run on out. The nuclear
There's
war
even
is
a,
gonna fall out.
There's even like an environmentalist company. I think it's called the 3%ers that it's basically like eco-terrorists that are now showing up.
We've always had eco-terrorists though.
But these guys are recruiting directly out of the military.
Oh yeah, they'll blow up buildings. They don't care, man. We've
I
always
think
had
that's-
it. We just
And I
kind
think
of
that's
sweep it under the
important
rug.
too. And I think that's important distinction, at least in my mind. If you've got these guys that are like eco-terrorists that are blowing things up, that's domestic terrorism. If you've got things like Antifa that are going around assaulting people, causing mass fear and panic, destroying property, all that, that is domestic terrorism. There have been, I would say, probably more examples of conservative groups being labeled as quote domestic terrorism groups because of whatever like leaning bias, whether
Because
the media
conservative
has it
groups
or
will
whatever.
grab guns. That's why.
Yeah, like they say, oh, these are like white
And the
supremacists.
Koreans.
Oh, the rooftop Koreans.
I could do an entire episode on those guys.
Dude, rooftop Koreans are my favorite, man.
Another episode of just riots happening in the world.
Yeah. Oh,
Causing.
exactly.
Mhm.
And the police just weren't going to help out, and so the Koreans were like, "Well, we're going to defend our own property because we're not giving it up." So, but I think there's been more examples of at least more of a propensity to label a conservative group, especially one that presents in an armed fashion, as a domestic terrorist group when there haven't been nearly as many examples of like mass destruction of property, mass like rioting, physical harm to people. Like obviously terrorism, depending on how you defined it, you could argue that some form of it is an intimidation factor, which could be a type of terrorism. But to me, you're making a real fine line argument there, and there hasn't been as much support in a sense. Obviously, like back in the day, perfect example, KKK, totally domestic terrorist group. Like lynchings, burning property, burning crosses, like mass.
There was an
fear
entire black town that was burned to the ground.
like mass fear and panic. Like that is about as clear-cut domestic terrorism as you can get. A group of Second Amendment supporting guys that show up in ballistic helmets, plate carriers, rifles slung around their chests with a pistol on their hip, basically saying, "We're not giving up our rights on that Second Amendment. You know, we're tired of all this woke BS." Like, stop it, Siri. She's listening to me and she's losing it right now.
She's just recording everything, just be like straight to
But
FBI.
she's like, I found this, and I'm like, I don't want to know what you found with that conversation right now. But no, I mean, to me, that is not a domestic terrorist group, and it's not a white. You can't call somebody a white supremacist
Did
group.
you say
if-
Lolita?
What? No.
No, that's what Siri's gonna think.
Oh yeah, she's like, and I'm like, no, not that search.
No.
You were definitely listening, but
Yeah.
But so to me, like, especially like a domestic terrorist group, like you have to be able to show like mass destruction of property and violence used against people, like these kinds of actions. Like to call somebody a white supremacist group, you have to show me what their manifests, like their goal, mission statements, their actions, their statements have shown that are in fact that.
Go ahead,
So I'm
Tim.
go. Yeah.
I was
That's
just kind of
what I got.
enjoyed listening.
Well, I mean,
Right.
what I want to bring the idea of the riots, right? So I want to kind of get your guys' ideas on what's going. So, do you think a riot is inherently a problem of woke culture, or is it a societal issue? Because I mean, that's a big thing that we dealt with in the past couple years. Because I mean, riots have existed for the longest time.
The problem is with riots, you get mob mentality. We were literally talking about bystander mentality. Mob mentality is the same thing. You'll get people drawn into riots that would never, ever, ever in a million years do that. And once the riot starts, they get dragged into it because everyone thinks, well, if everyone else is doing it, I can get away with it. And so,
It's the idea of not wanting to seem like an outsider and wanting to be part of the group.
Exactly.
And we even saw videos of riots where people were starting to break windows, and other people in the mob were grabbing them and telling them to stop and pushing them away. I mean, like, this is not like the entire mob went crazy and everyone, like, there was a group of people there that was causing violence, and that's going to be a majority of a part of a group. It's going to happen when anarchists come out and they're like, "Ooh, they're doing a riot. Let's go break stuff." It's just going to be what happens.
I'm gonna say it is unfortunate, but the riots, historical riots that are going to be remembered that come to my head have all been for liberal ideas, right? So the Detroit riots for unions, I can list a million of them for the past 3 years, quite frankly. So if I challenge any of you to figure out a riot that's been for a conservative other than January 6th, which everyone has their own feelings.
That burning of that entire black town was a riot. That was a riot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. So
And I think
A
historically,
lot of conservative riots have happened in the past, not as much in the present, but most acts of aggression in the past have happened from the minorities as a response to something that was done to them. Generally, the aggressors tend to be the conservatives in history.
I disagree with that. I mean, the entire fact of the Confederate States of America was a Democrat ideology over individual states' rights, specifically, slavery. The KKK was founded by the Democrat Party, and throughout history, multiple Democrats were Klan members. That is an undisputable and undeniable fact. The parties also did not switch. That has been debunked multiple times. It was more of a socioeconomic transition within the country of people moving from one area to another area in which fit their economic or social beliefs of the time. Historically speaking, I mean, that's...
If you're a Democrat and you participated in something like that, you are not a Democrat. You're acting as a Democrat.
Well, you're not a new Democrat. That's the problem, Raj. There's what we're living through right now is a shift between our parties, which has happened before, right? If you can look back at U.S. history, and parties have shifted. There was really no such thing as Republicans and Democrats. It was the freaking Federalists and the
Whig Party,
Republicans,
right?
Yeah, or the
Whig
or whatever.
When the Republican Party was founded in Jackson County, Michigan, it was the Abolitionist Party. Granted, say, Abraham Lincoln was a good guy, right? I think most people agree with that. Slavery was not at the top of his mind. The emancipation was not at the top of his mind when he was running for president. It just wasn't. Even though the Republican Party was the abolitionist party. The Democrats were in full support of slavery, and upon the end of the Civil War and the Union coming back together, and the Democrats keeping some aspect of state rights and allowing the Jim Crow era laws to be established in the South that still segregated blacks from whites, was a Democrat-led thing. Senator Byrd, who was the mentor for our current president, and Joe Biden was a mentor, is also a mentor for Hillary Clinton. You know what his position was in the Klan? One of the highest positions you could attain. And he was proud of that fact. He was proud of the fact that he was a Klan member. Granted, you say what you want. Oh, people can change throughout history, but it still speaks volumes when current Democrat politicians were mentored by a Klan leader.
Yeah, but we could also say the same thing about conservatives and how they hung out with Epstein.
But Democrats did as well. Epstein
Yeah.
was a middleman. He was a businessman, literally, right?
Not getting into that.
Yeah, but I mean that it is what it is. People on the right and left who are pedophiles who should be in prison, and the list should be released of who it was.
I'm just saying that I like my life. I'm currently happy with my life. If I come up missing tomorrow, or you find me dead in a ditch, please inquire.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the FBI agent to knock on our door and
There's no too much.
And, yeah.
You guys need to stop now.
No,
it's just
go ahead.
He's like, they're onto us.
We're
Yeah,
coming up
30
on
listening.
our 2 hours, so it's
yeah. So I mean,
Yep.
like I said, this is just a conversation with a bunch of friends. We're just talking about the woke culture and society as a whole. I think this was a look into the psychology and the sociology of the society that we're in now, just from the viewpoint of ordinary folk. I know Tim has a degree in psychology, and most of us keep tracks on what's going on in the world and what's happening. So we wanted to present our ideas to you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed the 2 hours of our banter as we talked about some pretty serious topics, and we've hopefully kept it lighthearted for you guys, so you guys can take bits and pieces about what we talked about and kind of have your own conversation with your friends and family. The biggest thing when it comes to woke culture is that we cannot let it consume our right to free speech. We have to be able to have these free conversations with one another. There are countries out there where if you say something wrong, you will go to jail. That is not this country. We want to bring back the type of discourse that the ideals of this country were founded on, where people can sit down, have a beer, talk about things that are going on in the world, go home, and still be friends with the people that they talk to. So that's the whole point of this. We're on season 2 of this, and hopefully we're conveying that message to you guys.
Well, I think it's important too. I mean, to touch on what you said, free speech, that's the first amendment in our Bill of Rights. Like, one of our free speech is our core tenet. I think ultimately it's what our entire kind of fabric is founded upon. At least a big portion of it. And you like I said in the beginning, you can't learn and grow if you don't have conflicting ideals and conflicting basic hardships kind of force against your own knowledge and experiences. It's necessary for personal growth. I mean, these scholars and philosophers from ages past, they didn't just surround themselves with people that had the same ideas as them. They wanted to go find people with different ideas and debate them. I think the actual format of debate's been lost on our society. We're losing the ability to critically think into the actual format of like a Socratic method of debate. And so I think it's important to keep that. And honestly, like you said, there's other countries where people are like, no, they have free speech. It's like, I think you assume they have free speech because they're a European Western style country, or they're Canada, they're very close to us. They don't. They have speech laws where like you said, you can't be jailed and imprisoned. And it's like, in this country, I will be darned if I ever see that day. Because I'm sorry, like, look, somebody can say some of the most hateful things to an individual. I'm not advocating for that. They should not, as a good human being. But legally, they have every right to do it. Like, there are very few limitations on free speech, and they have only been put there because of cases that have come up in the past of like certain times that you cannot say certain things. Best example, like, shouting fire in a crowded theater. The mass panic that can ensue because of that. But somebody calls you a bad word, somebody calls you something they don't like, or somebody refuses to call you something that you would like, you don't get to tell them what to say. You don't get to put them in jail or get them banned, or God forbid, you should basically cancel them or trying to get them fired because they said something that you didn't like. It's like everybody has a right to that. And honestly, that's something that should be vehemently protected and advocated for in this country, because the moment that that starts to fall down is when we're in a very bad decline.
Anyone have anything else?
USA.
No?
USA.
Yeah.
All right.
Missed it. Is this where we start chanting USA?
Today, we have hit 900 followers. Our goal is 2,000 by the end of this season. That means that we have, including this one, 14 more episodes to get there. We can't do it without you guys. So if you guys could let anybody know, mom, dad, brother, sister, best friend, worst friend, love them, hate them, send them our way. We don't care. Other than that, obviously, like, follow, subscribe, whatever you can do, and send us emails. We really appreciate hearing from you guys. With no one else having anything else to say, I will wrap it up and say, as always, stay ordinary, my friends.
As always, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Drunk with Questions.
Drunk with Questions wouldn't be possible without incredibly ordinary individuals such as yourselves. Make sure you join the Drunk with Questions crew every Sunday on your preferred podcast streaming website. Don't forget to like, follow, comment, and subscribe on all of our social media pages. And feel free to reach out to us by email at any time.